A Dozen Delicious Donuts, written by Elaine Reese Wyman and illustrated by Rita Friedman. A Dozen Delicious Donuts. Once upon a time, every donut had a hole. Then one day, everything changed. This is how it happened. Mr. D was decorating donuts. He had dishes of coconut, chocolate, and sugar. Mr. D dipped and dabbed each donut. After dipping and dabbing, the donuts danced to the mirror. They turned round and round. They wanted to see if Mr. D had done a good job of dipping and dabbing. If Mr. D missed even one little spot, they ran back for another dip or dab. Daisy Donut said, "Don't I look dazzling?" Danny Donut said, "Don't I look dandy?" Next came the most important part. It was time to go to the donut dentist. He can make a perfect donut hole. One at a time, the donuts sat down. The dentist drilled the donut hole. Then the donuts were ready to be packed. 12 donuts danced into each donut box, and a dozen donuts were ready to be delivered. Suddenly, trouble started. A dozen delicious donuts had a discussion. "I don't want to be dipped and dabbed," said one delicious donut. "And I don't like coconut on me. It makes me itch," said another donut. "And I'm allergic to chocolate," said another donut. "And the sugar gets in my eyes," said another one. Then the smallest donut spoke. She was a darling, dainty donut. She said, "I don't mind dipping and dabbing. I like coconut, sugar, and chocolate. I'm just afraid." "Afraid of dipping and dabbing?" asked the other donuts. "Oh, no," said the dainty donut. "I know you'll think I'm silly. You see, I'm afraid of the donut dentist." The dainty donut was sure the others would laugh at her, but instead each donut said something surprising. "Well, coconut doesn't really make me itch," said one. "And I'm not allergic to chocolate," said another. "And sugar really doesn't get in my eyes," said a third. "You're not? It doesn't? I don't understand," said the dainty donut. "Why did you say all of those things?" The delicious donuts all answered together. They said, "We're really afraid of the dentist, too." "I thought I was the only one," squealed Dainty Donut. "Let's not go to the dentist," shouted the donuts. And together they went to tell Mr. D about their decision. Mr. D heard the donuts coming. "We don't want to have holes," they cried. "We don't want to go to the donut dentist." Mr. D could hardly believe his donut ears. "Well, a donut has to have a hole," he said. "If you don't go to the dentist, you cannot be delivered." The dozen donuts had another discussion. Together they made a decision, and 2 by 2 they disappeared. The donuts decided to deliver themselves, and they stopped at the first house on the street. The 2 donuts rang the bell. "Donut delivery," they called. "Donuts? Where are the donuts?" asked the lady. "Down here," smiled 2 donuts. "You? Donuts?" laughed the lady. "Who ever heard of a donut without a hole?" The lady slammed the door shut. The donuts had tears in their eyes. "What happened?" asked the other donuts. "The lady said we're not donuts, and if we don't, 'cause we don't have a hole," they sobbed. The dozen donuts went from house to house. Each time the same thing happened. Someone would look at them and say, "A donut is not a donut without a hole." The dozen donuts were very discouraged. They sat down and cried great donut tears. It was getting dark. Mr. D worried about the donuts who had disappeared. Where could they be? So he decided to call the donut detectives. "Go look for a dozen delicious donuts," he said. The donut detectives did not delay. They sniffed and whiffed and sniffed again. They followed a delicious donut smell, and there sat the donuts in a puddle of tears. The donut detectives dried the donuts and drove them back to Mr. D. Mr. D was very angry with the donuts. "How could you disgrace me like this?" he cried. "Donuts should never be seen without a hole. Just look at you. Oh dear, oh dear. Why did this have to happen to me?" "It's all my fault," said the dainty donut. She told Mr. D about the story from the beginning, and when she finished, she cried. "The people said we're not donuts, but we are donuts, aren't we, Mr. D?" "Why, of course you're donuts," said Mr. D. "You just look a little different. Don't be afraid. You don't have to go to the donut dentist. We'll think of something special for you." Just then, the donut saw something on the desk. "What is in this dish?" she asked. "Oh, it's a dish of jelly," said Mr. D. "Many people want jelly donuts. I tried dipping and dabbing the jelly, but the jelly drips through the holes." That gave Dainty Donut an idea. "I got it," she said, dancing to the jelly dish. "We can be jelly donuts. We have no holes." "No," said Mr. D. "The jelly will rub right off the top." The Dainty Donut did not give up. "We can work in twos," she said. "The jelly will be between the two donuts. Please try it, Mr. D. Put some jelly on me, and then put another donut on top of me, like a sandwich." Mr. D dabbed the two donuts together. Why, it worked. Not a drop of jelly dripped. The donuts without holes were perfect. Everyone heard the news about the new donut style, and everyone wanted jelly donuts without holes. The dozen delicious donuts became world famous. Even the donut dentist was delighted.